This is the third of 3 videos where we're looking at what's new in Aspire version 8. In this one we're going to concentrate on the 3D side of the program, going to discuss the new clip art that's been added, going to show you the enhancements that have been made to how we can handle 3D components, some of the changes to the modelling tools, and finally the updates that have been made to 3D roughing and 3D finishing. Let's go ahead and create a new file to begin with, and for this job we're going to work on a part which is 8 inches wide by 12 inches high, 3/4 of an inch thick, and we'll set the XY datum to be in the centre and hit OK. Before we go ahead and work through our example, it's worth noting a couple of features and enhancements that have been made that we're not going to demonstrate. The first is that the software is now compatible with SketchUp 2015, so if you're exporting 3D models from the SketchUp software, it'll allow you to import the latest version into Aspire. The second is that we're now running in a 64-bit environment, so if you run a 64-bit operating system, that version of the software will automatically get installed, and that may give you significant benefits if you work with very large mesh files like STL models, or if you're calculating very complex 3D toolpaths. There are also other areas of the software where this will help with faster calculation times as well. Next, let's go ahead and look at the clip art. If we come down to the clip art tab, you'll see that the navigation for this has changed a little bit in the new version. There are 2 tabs at the top here, the library browser, which we can see at the moment, and then this other one for local files. Local files is essentially the same browser that you had in the previous version of Aspire, so this lets you work through your folder structure within your PC, find a folder that has clip art within it, select it, and get a preview of what's available within that folder. So you still have this ability to navigate around your system. The library browser, however, will automatically display any Aspire clip art that you've got installed. In addition, it lets you add folders from any location on your PC. This can make it easier to customize the selection of files that you have access to, and also if you're working on a particular job or project, you can easily access that folder and add that to the list that you can see here. For instance, if we click on the Add Folder button, maybe it would come up and we'll find the James Clip Art folder and hit OK. And there you can see that that will add one level of folder underneath, and I can select that now, and it's showing the different pieces of clip art that are available in that subfolder there. If we want, we can easily take and remove a folder too and go back to our standard list. In this case, I'm going to work with the standard clip art that comes with the software. And with version 8, we've actually enhanced this selection of clip art even further. We've added 50 new vector art 3D designs in all 3 styles, raised, dished and recessed, so that's actually 150 new models and over $1,500 worth of artwork if you were to purchase it from the website. For our design, the first thing I want to bring in is in the borders folder, so we'll select that and we'll scroll down until we get to the rope oval. And I'm just going to double click on that so that it loads in the center of our job. Now if we come down to the modeling tab, I'm going to tile the windows so we can see the 2D view on the left and the 3D view on the right. There's a couple of things existing Aspire users may notice at this stage. One is that our component in the component tree is sat under something called level 1. And this concept of levels to organise our components we're going to come back to a little bit later in the demonstration. The other thing is that if we select and then click on the object again to go into transform mode, not only do I see the transform handles in the 2D view that allow me to scale, rotate and move the object, but these are also visible in the 3D view as well. And that's because a major change to the program is the ability for me to now interact with 3D objects in the 3D view directly. Before I demonstrate that, I'm just going to resize this object, so we'll click on the icon there and I'm going to set its width to be 7 inches, hit apply and close. Now if we select the grayscale again, we go back into the transform mode, and as I mentioned before, we've got the handles both in the 2D and the 3D view now. So over in the 3D view here, it's possible for me to click and scale this if I want to. We can change that. I can hold the shift key down to scale around the center. I might want to rotate that, you can see that updating in both the 2D and the 3D view, and also we can click in the center there to move it around. So I've basically got all the same control that I would have had in the 2D view now in the 3D view, and you'll see me use this extensively throughout the rest of this demonstration. I'm just going to hit Control Z to undo my changes there so we can go back to the oval, the rope oval, the size that I want it. Now for a moment let's just maximize the 2D view and zoom to fit, and I'm going to come down to the Drawing tab, click on the icon to draw an ellipse, and I'm just going to create an oval vector shape which is 6.4 by 8.7, create and close, so that just slightly overlaps with the inside of our rope. Now let's come back to the Modeling tab, we'll tile the windows again, and I'm just going to select that vector and we'll make a simple dome shape. So I'm going to make this round, an angle of 20 degrees, base height 0, no limit. I'm going to set this to merge, and we'll call this new component Dome and hit Apply and close. Now let's delete the vector there. I'll just select that and get rid of it. And I'm actually going to maximize the 3D view, and for the rest of the modeling operations here I'm going to work just in the 3D view. We're not going to go back to the 2D view at all. Next I want to add in another component on top of our dome, so I'm going to come back to the Clip Art tab. We're going to go to the Objects and People, and I'd like to bring in the anchor, and again I'd like to put that in the middle, so I'm going to double click it rather than dragging it on. So that's automatically been selected there as the new object and has the transform handles on it. So I want to make that a little bit bigger, so I'm going to go over the corner transform handle, hold shift to scale around the middle, and just scale that up right in the 3D view, as you can see there. So same edit that I'd have had to previously go back to the 2D view to make, I'm able to make immediately and directly in the 3D view in the context of all the other 3D objects. Now the next component that I want to bring in is in the Animals folder, so I'm going to select that, and then we're going to scroll down until we get to the section where we'll find the seahorse. So I need to be looking under S. There's the seahorse model. I'm going to click and drag that into the sort of left hand side of the design here. So we can see that looks a little bit odd in that I've got a selected object which is red, but a lot of it isn't visible, and the green area shows me part of the selected object which is underneath another component. So this is very helpful when I want to identify where the silhouette of something is in comparison to the objects around it. So it's a very important part of being able to edit an object in the 3D view. However, I'd really like to see what's going on with these combine modes in the component tree, so we'll come over to the Modeling tab, and if we take a look, in the new version of Aspire, the component tree actually works from the bottom up, and this is a lot more logical really if you think about the foundations of something being at the bottom and then the other objects build up on top of that until you get to the result of everything at the top. So just something to be aware of though, if you're an existing Aspire user, when you start to use version 8 you'll need to work from the bottom of the component tree upwards. Now in this case we've got a rope oval which is merging with the dome. The anchor is added on top of the dome, which is correct. I want the anchor to sit on top of it, but the seahorse is set to merge, so that's merging into the dome. So I'm going to right mouse click and change the combine mode for that to add, so it's going to add on top of the dome. The only problem I have now is it's also being added to the anchor as well. So on these areas where they overlap, I've got the combination of the two things, which is not correct. That's not what I want to see. I want the seahorse to merge with the anchor, but then for both of those objects to sit on top of the dome. Now how you would have previously handled this is you would have needed to adjust the components to get them into just the right place before grouping them together and then setting that group to add. With the advent of the concept of levels in the component tree, we no longer need to do that, and that's one of the significant benefits of having these levels. So in this case what I can do is right mouse click, insert a new level, and I can move those two objects that I want to merge together onto that second level, and I can right mouse click and set them to merge. So now they're merging in with each other, which is correct, but because the level is set to add and because it is adding onto the result of what's on level 1, now what's happening is I've got the rope and the dome merging, they make up level 1. the anchor and the seahorse merging that make up level 2, but the levels themselves are being added together so that I get the correct result in the 3D view with the composite model. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in the previous version of the software we could achieve the same thing by grouping the objects together. The problem with a group though is I cannot interactively individually work on any of those components once they've been grouped without first ungrouping them. Now, by using the levels, I'm able to get the same effect, but I can still come in, and if I want to move one of those objects or change something about it, I can do that without affecting the other one. So for instance, if I come in, double click to select the seahorse, click on it again to go into transform mode, I can now click on the rotate handle and I can rotate that around, individually edit that without changing the anchor. Very, very powerful way for me to control my 3D objects and still retain them combining in the way that I want them to. As well as this very practical use of the levels, it's also possible just to use them from an organisational point of view. For instance, I might want to treat them in a similar way that I do the layers in 2D just to organise my 3D objects. I may want to come over and rename them to help me to understand how I've got things structured. So if I right mouse click on the level name there, we might want to call that base shapes, and then right mouse click on this one and rename that, and we could call that detail. As I say, there's no relation between what you name these and what's actually happening. It's just purely organisational in order to help me see the structure of my part. As well as moving, scaling and rotating the objects in the 3D view, I can also access a number of the component properties. Let's just look down the Z-axis for a moment here and zoom in on the job. I'm just going to double click to select the anchor, click on it again to go into transform mode, and this hard blue square at the bottom of the transform handles here, I'm just going to left click on that in order to bring up this form. If we just drag that out the way there, you can see that this is giving me a selection of the component properties. So I can change the combine mode at the top here. We can adjust the shape height. Maybe we'll put that to 0.2. Hit space to accept that. I can add a base height, and we can also fade and tilt. If I want to fade or tilt from the 3D view, then I check the option, click the set button, and then just click the 2 anchor points in the 3D view the same way I would normally do it in the 2D view, and you can see there that just lowered down the top of the anchor. Now if I change my selection, double click onto our seahorse and click again to go into transform mode. Now with the same form I could edit that, so we can make the seahorse 0.2, and this time I might want to tilt it. If we set from the tail up to the head, and we'll just go in here and set this to be maybe 1 degrees, and I think that actually looks pretty good there. So now we've got the seahorse's head sitting clean above the top end of the anchor. If we close this now, we can see we've still got to resolve what's happening with the seahorse's tail here. I don't really want to tilt or fade these components anymore, so I think I'm just going to sculpt out the areas of the seahorse that I don't want in order to make it appear that it's going behind the anchor. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit further and pan the view over. Make sure the seahorse is the selected object, and click on the icon to go into the sculpting. Now the challenge we've got at this stage is I want to accurately remove some of the tail, but I want to do it in the context of where the edge of the anchor is, and I can't see that anymore. New feature that's been added in version 8 though is the ability to show the grayscale background, and this allows me to see where the edge of other parts of the model are, and this is very useful to me in certain sculpting operations. So here in this case, if we just pan up and then zoom in on that part of the model, now we can choose the undo option here. I'll just make the diameter a little bigger, and holding the shift key down means that I can just delete towards the edge of the part there. We can also take away a little bit in the corner of the arrow there, and then we can come in and remove this area here as well. So I'm just going to be quite careful where I do that. We'll also come in then and just smudge those edges, so we'll just take that diameter down a bit, smudge this out. And then if we hit OK, we should see the result of that. And you can see there that we've been able to take that back very much close to where the edge of the arrow is. Now we could of course go back in and continue to work on that now, but that's much more accurate than I would have been able to get without having the grayscale there. So we'll click on the icon to zoom to fit. Now I want to create a mirrored copy of the seahorse over on the other side, so I'm going to double click it to select it, and we could either use the mirror command from the transform objects, or we can also use the shortcut key Ctrl-Shift-H, which would work in the 2D view in order to create that horizontal copy using the center line of the job for symmetry. Now one note worth making at this point is how you select objects that are overlapping with each other in the 3D view here. For instance, we have the seahorse's head, the anchor and the dome all in the same position at this point, and if I wanted to select an object there, I can double click, but that's always going to select the object that's effectively in front of the others. If I want to select something behind, if we just deselect that and right mouse click there, you can see it gives me a list of all the objects that are under the cursor in that position, so I could choose either the anchor or the dome in that situation. Let's just double click in order to deselect that again. To finish our design, I want to add a banner across the bottom of the job, perhaps somewhere that we could engrave text into if we wanted to customize it. Now that's going to import on whatever the currently selected level is from the component tree, and if I want I can preempt that by right mouse clicking here, saying insert a new level, renaming that level, and we could call that banner. Now we can go to the clip art tab, and if we go onto the ribbons and banners folder, we'll come down and I'm going to double click on ribbon 8, and that'll place that right in the middle of the job there. If we go back to the modeling tab, I can see that's being added to everything else by the fact that the combine mode for that level is set to add. In this case I want that to merge with everything, so I'm going to right mouse click over the level and change its combine mode to merge, and you'll see the icon has changed there, it's updated, and now that object has disappeared though, and that's because it's sitting below the other objects in the design at that point. And this is where it becomes very important in the 3D view that when I select that I can see the green silhouette there, and now what I can do is click on that again in order to be able to select that, hold the shift key down and then just drag that vertically down. The shift just is going to keep that vertical, and now that it comes to an area where it starts to be more prominent, I'm going to see it sticking above apart from on the bits of the rope there. Again I'm going to hold shift down so that I can scale that up around the center there, and we can just make that whatever size we want. Can move it up a bit there if we like, and we could even go ahead and increase the height of this. So if we click there to go into the combine mode, maybe we want to make that 0.15 of an inch, or maybe even add a little bit of a base height on it in order to ensure that it's raising up in front of the rope there. So again, you can see making these edits in the 3D view very powerful, and that ability to see the object underneath something else is extremely important when I don't have the grayscale outline to help me identify it. Let's just double click in the background to deselect that now. Before we start toolpathing the job, I want to show you some other features that have been added to help on the modeling side of things in the software. The first of these is very simple but effective, and is a nice new way that we've got of shading a model. If we come up to view, you can see we have this option now to use shadow shading, and if I check that, you can see that immediately the part has kind of got this added impact, this sort of black shadowing that's been added on there. If we just switch that off again, you can see how much more effective it is with that switched on, but also how very natural it looks as well. Now when that's switched on, if you want to enhance it further, you can hold down Control on the keyboard and use the plus key in order to increase the intensity of it, or the minus key while holding the Control down to decrease it. So that's the shadow shading. We'll just leave that switched on. Another very simple but useful function that's been added to the software is this icon here that allows us to create a component from the visible model. This will just take all the objects we can see in the 3D view, or the composite model as we often refer to it, and we'll make a single component out of those that we can then interact with using the tools that would ordinarily have required us to bake the objects together. This just makes it very easy for us to create a safe copy of our parts for when we need to do those operations that require the baking. A good way to do this is to set up a level for that component to go on. So if I right mouse click, say insert new level, and we'll just rename that and call it final part. And now with that being the current level, I'm going to click on the icon here to create the component from everything we can see in the 3D view. Momentarily we'll get a double thickness model, but if we just right mouse click over that level and say show only this, it'll undraw all our original components, which are now safely kept there, and we've got this single object that we can go ahead and work on without worrying about the fact that they need to be baked together. Another completely new function that's been added to Aspire 8 is the ability to do a 3D offset of the model. It's not particularly applicable for this example, but we can demonstrate how it works. I'm just going to switch off the shadow shading for a moment so it's a bit easier to see what's happening. If we click on the offset model, this is just going to take whatever's in the composite model here. It'll ultimately create a new component for us, and we just specify the distance that we'd like that component to be offset from the original. If we put in a positive value, the model's going to get larger. So if we just put in a value of 1/8 of an inch and hit preview, you'll see it's almost like the model's been inflated a little bit, and there's the result of that. Or if I just cancel that and come back into the offset command, we could put in a negative value of 0.05 of an inch, just a small amount there. Can tell the software I want to clip the Z values to the 0 plane so it doesn't lower them below that. And then if we hit preview, you can see that's going to offset that inwards. And what we could do is flip that over and machine that out in order to create the back cavity so that we could create a very specific wall thickness for something. And that would be applicable if you had work that you're doing perhaps for a press or a mold, something like that. In this case, I'm just going to hit cancel. I don't want to create that additional model of the offset there. The final tool on the modelling side of things that I want to look at is the smoothing tool. And this has been enhanced to make it much quicker and give you better ability to do much more aggressive smoothing if you want. So let's also give you a demonstration of that. Now this will either work on the visible components if nothing is selected, or if we pick a particular component it will just work on that. So here I'm going to select this one that we've already created that's baked together. We'll click on the smoothing filter. And the main difference with this is you'll see this button to bake the current smoothing. Before we could smooth the object, but then we'd either have to hit OK or cancel, and if we wanted to smooth it some more we'd have to go back into the smoothing function, so it would be quite time consuming if you wanted to do really extreme smoothing. Now not only has the smoothing been strengthened, so if I turn that up to max I get quite a high level of smoothing, but I can also bake that current smoothing and then it will reapply the smoothing again. So if I just keep hitting the button, I can make an object smoother and smoother very, very easily. In this case, I don't want to smooth this quite that much, so we can go ahead and hit cancel there. And maybe I just want to come into that and very gently smooth it just to knock off some of the edges. So here we'll just specify something maybe around 20% of that. I think that looks good, so we can hit OK. And really at this point we're ready to go over and look at some of the changes we've made to the toolpathing side of things. Let's click on the icon, switch over to the toolpaths tab and just check our material setup for this job. So I'm just going to put in a small gap above here and hit OK. Everything else looks alright there. Now I'm going to come in to the 3D roughing toolpath and I'm going to select 1/4 inch end mill from the tool database here. Let's hit OK and we'll just take the default values for that, and you'll see that this is a big change within both the roughing and the finishing. Previously I would always had to create a vector in order to define a specific boundary around the model. Now the software will automatically calculate that boundary for me based on the visible components just by selecting this model boundary option. I've also still got the choice to do material boundary, which would be the outer edge of my job, so the rectangle around the outside here, or to use a selected vector as well in the same way that we would have previously. In this case though, with no vector, I'm going to say use the model boundary. Let's put in an offset to that. There's the machining allowance. We're going to do Z-level roughing for this. And then another new option that's been added for Aspire 8 is the ability to add ramping plunge moves for the roughing. Again, when we're doing something like Z-level roughing, it can be quite harsh on the tool if we always have to vertically plunge into the material. Now we have the option to ramp in here. We can put in a small distance there, give the toolpath a name and hit calculate, and that's just going to calculate the toolpath for us, and we can see if we look closely the zigzag there of the ramp coming down into the job, so that's just going to lessen the force on the tool, or certainly the force on the bottom face of the tool as it ramps down and into the part there, and so hopefully reducing tool wear and also perhaps reducing some movement in the tool as it tries to move vertically into the material. Now we can go ahead and preview that, take a look. I'd expect everything pretty much to look as it did in the previous version of the software. Maybe we'll change the material to cherry, that's a little clearer to see. And now if we close that, calculate a finishing toolpath, again here we're going to use a 1/8 ball nose, and we're going to choose this model boundary option, put in the boundary offset there. So again, no vector, this is just picking up the edge of our visible components in order to create the boundary for the finishing. So that's the new option there within the 3D machining, is the ability to use that model boundary for the roughing and the finishing, and then also, as you saw there, the ability to add ramping on the roughing toolpaths. If we want to preview that, we can see what our job would look like, and there we've created a nice plaque. Essentially most of the work, 90% of the work being done all in the 3D view to assemble those components and to edit and manipulate them in order to create the design we want. So that concludes our look at what's new in Aspire 8 from the 3D side of the program. If you haven't watched the videos on the drawing or the 2D and 2.5D toolpath features, then we'd recommend taking a look at those. Otherwise, if you want to actually try the features for yourself, then you can go to the Vectric website and download the free trial version of Aspire 8 and install it on your PC to take a look at these functions. Thanks for watching this video.